So welcome everyone. My name is Kelly Perrin. I'm the Assistant Director at the Institute for National Security and Counterterrorism, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our talk today. This is our first talk this year in our Carol Becker Speaker Series. Carol Becker is an alumni of Syracuse University that's interested in fostering a dialogue about security and issues in the Middle East that crosses all disciplines, all political perspectives, and all cultural differences, and we really appreciate Carol's support. The next talk in this speaker series will be held on October 28th. You'll all be getting an email announcing that it's coming, but I'm just going to give you a head up. Our next speaker, her name is Tamara Wittes. She's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, and she's the director of the Sabin Center for Middle East Policy. So it's October 28th. We'll send you a reminder email. Today, however, we are proud to welcome Ori Swed. Swede or Swed? Swed. Sorry, I'm messing it up already. Ori Swed, he's an emerging scholar in the Department of Sociology at the University of Texas at Austin. His main research area is in the intersection between culture and conflict in global and historical perspectives. He's also interested in the evolution of reciprocal relations between society and conflict, such as military technology, economy and conflict, terror and anti-terror relations, and their effects on society. All great stuff. We had an opportunity to talk with Ori this morning over breakfast. It's all great stuff. Before joining the University of Texas, Ori received his master's in history from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He is also a reserve captain in the Israeli Defense Force. He also has some experience as a private consultant, and we can get to that at lunch. The title of Ori's talk today is The Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, a Case Study in Historical Contingency. So please join me in welcoming Ori.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for everyone that troubled himself coming here. Thank you for having me. I am about to talk about two things. One is the case study, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The second is something that I believe most of you will find very useful. There is a mic, I'm wearing it, but apparently it's not getting it better? Oh. Okay. So, two centers. Hearing me? Yes? Okay. No, that's fine, that's fine. Better? Better? Yes? No? Yes. So I just need to speak up. That's the whole thing. Two centers. The first, the case study. I will address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a bit of a different approach. The second thing is contingency, the question of contingency. I will explain why is it important and how is it relevant to most of us. So I will start by explaining what contingency is, what historical contingency is, and how can we use it or take contingency into account when doing research. Can help us examine questions from a different angle. After that, I will try to explain, briefly and as objectively as I can explain the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and explain why this is a state of historical contingency. And then we'll go to the analysis. We'll see what we can get out of that. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a high-profile conflict. We are bombarded actually with the images, narratives, ideas that create a very bewildering and contradicting pictures. It's not only among the Israeli versus the Palestinian side that we can live with that dichotomy. It's within the Israeli political system itself. You hear all those contradicting voices that do not make sense. For example, I think last week it was the deputy of the Minister of Defense that published an op-ed in the New York Times arguing for the annulment of the two-state solution at the same time that the government itself is advocating for the same solution with the peace talks. And it's not a member of the opposition. It's not even a member of a different party. It's a member of the same party as the Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's the same party. Something that does not make sense there. It's just one example out of many. So I'm going to focus on discourse and not this discourse. I'm going to focus on the war of narratives in the Israeli political system. And through that, we will get an interesting perspective of what's going on. Starting with the theory. History and contemporary social events, they are not linear. We tend to interpret them as linear. We finish our day looking back and we see a linear story. But if we will examine our day step by step, we will see that we are entering and exiting contingency, uncertainties, and choosing, making decisions all the time. So a better representation of our day won't be the linear line. It would be all those junctions. Contingency is all around us. For example, you can watch a basketball game. You will be in contingent, state of contingency only if you are emotionally invested in the game. You are sure that your team is going to win, and then Kobe gets the ball and shooting, and you are in contingency. This is what's happening to us. Now, historical contingency is something that is progress throughout time. It's a state of contingency that it's not short, it's not brief. It's in progress, and it is long enough for us to attach to it narratives and ideologies, and to make a complicated story out of it. I'm using the Dewey's idea, ends in views that for law students it might be familiar, to try to tackle this problem. So we have the state of contingency. According to Dewey, we imagine a solution to the contingency in our heads. It could be realistic or imaginative, but still, this is what we imagine. And then we narrate our way back. So we are creating a linear story. It's something that we're doing all the time. It's based on, there is a host of literature in cognitive studies that demonstrates how we're doing it all the time. So our entry point would be the state of contingency, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in terms of what would be the solution. Nobody is sure now, entertaining several ideas, shifting from one option to another. This is the state of contingency. The solution, the end, would be our independent variable. One state, two state, or no solution. There are other options, but those are the strongest and the most dominant in the Israeli discourse. We will use them as the independent variable, and we'll use the political ideologies as mediate variables, and the parties' agendas as the dependent variable, the narratives. the Israeli-Palestinian case. So why the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a state of contingency? Why there is a contingency there? At the heart of this conflict rests a very peculiar legal interpretation of the territory. The argument is that the territory belongs to no one. You have land that belongs to no one, which is not very odd if you'll take the 18th century legal perspective. But today, you have only two places in the world that you have land that attached to legal interpretation that says that it belongs to no one. One is Antarctica, and the other is those territories in the West Bank, Israel, Palestine. It depends in your interpretation. Israel adopted this legal interpretation officially as part of its rationalizing attempt. In order to maintain the order as it is, as martial law, and to keep the land. But the outcomes of that is that Israel right now does not have borders. Israel does not have internationally recognized borders because the situation is still fluid. Everything's still moving. State of contingency. Of course, this is the Israeli interpretation. There are other interpretations, but we're looking at the Israeli political arena. So, some background. In the beginning was the stage of the creation and consolidation of the state of contingency. After that, there is the stage of attempts to deal with it or to solve it. Everything started with the British mandate on the historical Palestine. The UN plan for partition the land allocated 55% of the land to the Jewish people, 45% to the Palestinian people. The Jewish signed the contract, signed the deal, ratified their legal rights. The Palestinian did not. Why? The Husseini family, that was the leading political force at the Palestinian society at the time, was tempted to the advice of the Arab nations around that told them, if you won't sign, we will attack Israel because we don't want the Jewish entity that will be stuck in the middle of the Middle East, and you will get the entire territory. So it was. It made sense at the time. It was a calculated gambit, but apparently it proved wrong, and it opened this window, this door to interpretation, to different legal interpretation. In 1967, in the 1967 war, Israel took over entire mandatory Palestine and other territories and adopted officially this legal interpretation. Late 80s, beginning of the 90s, civil unrest, the first Intifada. The Palestinians want their own land, their own country. It resulted in the peace process, the Oslo Accord. that advocated for the two-state solution. In 1995, the assassination of the Israeli Prime Minister Rabin halted the process. And though it did not stop completely, it, as one of the head of the Israeli intelligence services at the time said, both sides came to the negotiations with not much honesty in them. It exploded in 2000, the second Intifada, literally exploded, targeted killing, suicide bombing, and all that chaos. This ended in the death of Yasser Arafat and the Israeli unilateral disengagement plan. Israel retreated from Gaza. Right now, Gaza is without settlers, but it's not free. You can say it's a crippled entity. The Oslo Accord changed a bit the legal definitions. So there was this division between A territories, B territories, C territories. Each type of territory brought with it legal rights, or took rights, it depends from whom. So the brown areas, A territory, yellow, B territory, and the rest, the type of blue thing, is the C territories. Those, of course, the brown, the A territories are the smallest, and those are under the most control of the Palestinian Authority. The dots here are clusters of population. Red are a cluster of Palestinian population, and blue is clusters of Israeli settlers. So you see, we have very complicated picture. The Israeli settlements project started quite early and became an enormous thing. Right now, between 3.5 to 4% of the Israeli population are settlers in the West Bank. So this is the situation. This is a state of contingency. Now let's get to the analysis. So the state of contingency offers us three solutions, at least in the Israeli political sphere. One state solution, two state solution, and no solution. Those solutions are mediated by ideology, liberal left and liberal, national and national realist, etc. And those are the end games, the narratives. Those are the end games of this story for each group. So in the slide that I showed how we imagine a future and then narrate our way back, this is the future, and this is the way that we narrate ourselves back. So, for example, the first one, one-state solution of according to the liberal left and liberal, would put democracy over Jewish identity. Put democracy, democratic value, over religious and ethnic values or affiliations. It corresponds with the democratic liberal notion in the West. The second one, one-state solution, national extremist and religious fundamentalist, explain their story, the way that they see their state is as Jewish over democratic, putting the ethnicity and religious element on top of democracy. The meaning of that would be a state that it doesn't really matter how many citizens you have, what are the distribution or the proportions, the Jewish group will have better privileges. The two-state solutions. First is liberal and liberal national interpretation based on the 1967 borders with some sort of negotiation, but this is with some corrections. This is probably what most of you have in mind when you imagine the conclusion of this contingency. The national realist adopt a zero-sum game instead of win-win interpretation. So the zero-sum game is based on existing settlements. It means that we will try to get as much as we can and then sign the best deal that we can. It doesn't really matter if the other side won't be happy about it. It doesn't really matter if they will have only Nablus and Jenin and we'll have everything around it. It's fine by us. They signed the contract, it's fine. The no solution, it is a very interesting approach because those ride on the contingency. They adopt the contingency and ride on it. So you have the national realist that believe that there won't be solution soon, in the near future. And therefore, all you have to do is to manage the conflict and wait for an opportunity that will assist you with solving the situation. It does not have to be a benign solution. It could be many things, but that's the interpretation. The second is a national extremist, religious fundamentalist that believes that there is no possible solution. It's inherent. It's part of a war between good and evil. There is no solution. It's something that will continue. So, using this map, we can examine policies. We can examine policy-driven entities or concepts. It's not just a bunch of words, narrative that flowing in the air. It has consequences. Take, for example, the one up here, the first one, roadblocks and democracy over Jewish. So those who are holding the interpretation of democracy over Jewish will identify roadblocks as a policy, as something that's happening now, as negative and violation of human rights. If you move one aside, you will see that they will see it as something positive and as a prerogative, as masters of the land. This map is not only map of the rationale behind actions. It's also a map of the political web, the Israeli political web. It shows us who can ally with whom, and on what topics they might conflict, points of contests. It does not mean that, for example, the two-state solution based on the 67 borders cannot get into coalition with the two-state solution based on the national realist interpretation. But it means that on the points of contest, for example, the settlement projects, they will have to find some sort of a political way to deal with it. For example, right now, you have, this is the distribution of those narratives in the Israeli Knesset. The coalition is the no solution, the one state, a sectarian party, and one party from the two-state solution. The one party from the two-state solution is the one that pushing forward the peace process now. And though they really don't like the idea of the settlements, they think it's waste of energy, effort, money, and damaging the atmosphere. They were able to find a way to go around it. How? At least what's the rumors that coming from the negotiations, stating that the two-state solution, as it's presented in the peace talks, will leave some of the settlers outside of Israel, and they could decide if they would like to stay or not. No forced evacuation. So for this party, Hatnua, it's fine. Another thing that we see here is the two-state solution has majority, but they are mostly not part of the coalition. This is odd, and the reason for that is those are the numbers of parties that are holding, well, at least in their agenda, the narratives. You can see that the two-state solution, you have 7 different parties. It means that though they agree on that, they do not agree on many other things. While the one-state solution and the no solution, just one party. Okay? This graph tells us a very interesting story. Several stories, actually. Here on the left, you have the number of representatives in the Knesset, the Israeli Parliament, out of 120, and over here you have 6 different terms of the Knesset. You can see that during the second Intifada, for example, you can see up there, between 2000 and 2005, the two-state solution idea did not receive much popularity, while the no solution at all was on a rise. Another interesting story is that right after the end of the second Intifada, the disengagement from Gaza brought with it a lot of hope to the two-state solution, and then, because of many things, it did not work well enough, or as people anticipated, and you can see the rise of no solution. It was so high that in the next election, people got so depressed, and so they decided to go on the sectarian way, to leave this unsolved problem and to deal with their own sectarian problems. So, what did we do here? We identified the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a state of contingency. We used the narratives, the solutions as independent variable, the ideology as mediate variables, and narratives as dependent variables to explain. And we received a map. We had a map that gives us some sort of explanation to politics, policies, and rationale of the actors. Eventually, this entire entire process was driven out of trying to deal with the contingency. And it provided us with this map, this web, that I hope you'll find useful, the map itself or the practice. Thank you so much. Questions?
Just for clarification, when you said sectarian, you mean like no opinion or no formal stance on a solution?
No formal stance. It could be that it's, I don't know if you're familiar with the Israeli parties. It could be Shas, it could be Yesh Atid, that officially they are not advocating for any solution. It's not part of their agenda. It could be that the people there probably have many ideas on their heads. Because we're dealing with narratives, it's not enough that the agenda of the party stating that it advocates for one solution or the other. The people in the party might feel otherwise, and you can see it. You can see it that in the Likud today, you have members that will advocate for the no solution, realist approach, and there would be those who will advocate for the one-state solution. There would be others that for the no solution at all. So I used the agenda, the party agenda, as some sort of guideline, because examining each and every person, it's you get into the psyche of people. It is very problematic. Yes.
So, what is your personal opinion? What do you think? Which one is the viable solution in the near future?
My personal opinion. I was trying to avoid that. That was the purpose of showing you how many options there are and how can you interpret them differently. My personal opinion is that the two-state solution is probably, based on the 1967 borders, probably the wisest in terms of the sustainability of the peace. And well, that's the only solution that will hold. But yeah, I am mediating my my narrative through my ideology, so it's my opinion. Yes.
So you've mapped out the Israeli narratives. Have you tried to do the same process with Palestinian narratives?
Well, no. The reason is that I don't speak Arabic, and I'm not as familiar with the Palestinian culture in order to be able to discern between types of narratives, and I don't want to do a lousy work there. This is why. But yes, there is room for that. Actually, I introduced you here with analytical tool, analytical instrument. If one of you would like to try, that's fine. I would like to know. I would believe that they correspond somehow, but they have their own little twists. Yes.
Can you explain the decision to put the solutions as the independent variables? Because couldn't you also argue that the parties' end game, or the parties to the negotiations' end games, could be independent variables and the outcomes dependent on those agendas?
The question of causation. Yes, in theory you can. This is why I'm building on Dewey. So I am building on an existing process and on the literature that supports that. I'm not saying, well, that would be my independent variable because I would like it to. Okay?
The approach of looking at narratives, because it seems like the stories we tell are what we've come to believe. I'm wondering if you've done any thinking about the sort of the sub-narratives, you know, we can't trust them, they want to send us into the sea. You know, in other words, what are all the sort of sub-narratives at a human level that you know, kind of are the scaffolding for those other big master narratives, you know? They will never, that we can never live in peace with those people. In other words, like, what are all those things that people say that buck up those other narratives?
Okay, on that case study I did not, but on other, that I have something here. I was looking at narratives in the Israeli media on how they interpret the Arab Springs event in Egypt. And I went through articles in the newspaper and picked the tone, those things. We cannot believe in them, they are so-and-so, or it's good for us, whatever, and categorize them. From those categories, I created a more concrete narrative. It was not I did not invent it. It was all over in the media. One, Islamic winter, meaning that what happens in Egypt is very bad. It poses a threat. The fundamentalists will take over, etc. The second is dictatorship. It's Orientalist point of view. That they don't know what democracy is. It doesn't really matter. They will try, and then they will fall back to dictatorship, and we can work with those dictators. And the third is Arab Spring, liberal, democratic, civil society. Everything is coming to life, and you can see those stories. They are here. You can see that at the beginning, the liberal interpretation was very high. Here, in the presidential elections, you can see that the three of them are competing, but the liberal is the highest because there is a democratic process. But the moment that it was decided that Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood took over, then no liberal discourse. It's Islamic winter or dictatorship. That was my attempt to deal with that, and it's related to the question of contingency and dealing with narratives. Yes.
One of the biggest, when we talk about the peace, one of the biggest impediment is the trust deficit. You see, so how optimistic you are about the renewed peace, recent peace talks between Palestine and Israel leaders?
I'm not that optimistic. But again, this is my opinion. It seems that it has better chances than usual, but there are so many forces inside the Israeli political system that try to annul it, try to disturb it. I mean, it is very difficult. Very difficult. I'm more optimistic than usual, but in general, not as optimistic. Okay? Yes. Yes.
Of the 10% of representatives in the Knesset that support the one-state solution, how many of those support the democratic one-state solution? I didn't think so.
None. The distribution. Yeah. Israeli political system is. This is the center. It tends to the left. The representation here is on the same party here and here, same party here and here, because there are two parties that got together. So when you're tracing the process, you see that. This party is not part of the Knesset. It ran in the election, but it's not part of the Knesset. And they advocate for the democracy of the Jewish. Nonetheless, those narratives are present in other parties, in the Arab parties, and I believe that it's in Meretz as well, one of the liberal national party. Okay? Yes.
In your opinion, how would you say, or how would you to try and like reconnect, like, or build that trust between like the Israelis and Palestinians? You know, in your opinion, as an Israeli citizen and as a member, you know, of the IDF, through experience, do you see it as a possibility? As a, you know,
to gap the mistrust. I think that yeah, that there is this option, but you have to really brainwash the population, because brainwashing with the liberal narratives, you can say. The population right now, if we'll examine the narratives, and you can see it in the representation of the narratives in the Knesset, standing to the right. The Israeli interpretation of reality, based on this colonial legal interpretation, which it could be valid. I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying it is. But this is the source. This is the source of this interpretation, which for people here in the United States, it's really odd. It does not make sense. So you have to really push your narrative and try to get into more discourse. Try to highlight a different perspective. To my opinion, if there would be a TV station, a TV like Al Jazeera, but not Al Jazeera, that talks about cooperation and peace and bringing that would be the subtext of the show, of everything. That might push things to the other direction, but that's again my opinion. Yes.
I had a couple questions. The first is your pie chart with the breakdown of the narratives.
sure. This is the entire Knesset, or this is just the coalition? Because you
Entire
mentioned
Knesset.
okay, that
Entire
makes more
Knesset.
sense. Okay.
Okay.
The other question, you had mentioned, like in Al Jazeera, that there's a new television station, I-29 News, 24 News. I don't know if you've been watching it.
In the Israeli base, something. Yes,
They're
it's
in Tel Aviv.
not good.
Okay,
My
I haven't
opinion.
seen. I've only watched the English and the Hebrew stuff, so I don't know what they're saying in Arabic. But in that, but you mentioned you hadn't. Your Arabic isn't as strong. Okay. Because I was wondering if you knew what they were saying in the Arabic. From what I was understanding, they were interviewing like Balad and several other Arab MKs.
Well, the thing is that Israel is in a really problematic situation. I'm not sure that any democratic country in the same condition would act differently. That's the absurdity of things. So it's very easy for us to say, yeah, the bad guys are the good guys, but maybe we should look at it as a case of what happened when democracy is under constant attacks, or have this notion, have this feeling of constant attack. The channel that you're referring to is an attempt of Israel to deliver its own message, which is a very interesting attempt, but it won't be the attempt that will solve the conflict. Yes.
On a couple of your slides, you have kind of a timeline with major historical events.
We're going over here. Yes.
Yeah. Second Intifada, disengagement from Gaza.
Yes.
But then you don't seem to follow it up with the siege of Gaza, which is ongoing and very relevant.
Yeah.
Nor does your timeline include Operation Cast Lead, the invasion of Gaza,
Yeah.
and the massacre there. And it seems to me that if you don't include those historical events, you are prejudicing the narratives in a way that's not responsible.
First of all, I really appreciate your comments. The thing is that I'm taking the Israeli perspective here. And in the Israeli perspective, those are not really, they do not matter. Like it or not, just or not just, this is the Israeli perspective. I was really struggling to think what to put there. And yeah, I could put many things all over. But the things that in the Israeli narrative, that how they interpret political action and reality, those the things that matter. The average Israeli do not see Gaza as under siege. They see Gaza as an entity that received their freedom, and instead of building casinos and whatever, they shooting missiles. This is the Israeli perspective. I hope I answered your question.
Well, it doesn't untrouble me. I think regardless of how the Israelis view things, the fact that they view it with such cognitive dissonance that they erase very important factors that affect their situation.
Yep. That's part of.
I think you have to, maybe in your presentations in the future, if you would kind of acknowledge that, that would be helpful to those of us who aren't caught up in the Israeli narrative.
Thanks. Okay. Yes.
I think one of the really interesting parts of this project is how you map the kinds of political alliances that can form or can't form, which is, I think, a testament to how UT Austin trains graduate students, because you're a sociologist, but you have a real acuity for political science. So think about political science journals for just that part of your project here. I think that's very, very innovative. The narrative determining coalitions and sub-coalitions, and then specific policies as well. But I want to sort of follow up on this point, and on the Israeli perspective and the Israeli narrative. In a way, the way you frame this is the narratives seem so fixed and not really malleable or flexible. But I'm thinking about when Anwar Sadat came to Jerusalem, and if you looked a year before he came, you would see all this same types of narratives, and look very similar, right? But he comes to Jerusalem, he speaks over Begin and over the intransigent politicians directly to the Israeli public. And the narratives they just melt away, and there's this swelling of support for a peace treaty. And so I'm wondering whether there's, in a sense, a poverty of leadership, right? A poverty of leadership in that there really isn't a Sadat that can reach out and change the narratives on the societal side. And that's a poverty of leadership in a sense on both sides. I mean, and I think on the Israeli side of Rabin, and Rabin was not a saint, okay? He had a checkered past. But when Oslo happened, right before his assassination, there was a lot of terrorism. Israelis were being killed. There was an uptick, certainly, of violence. Now, what would have happened if Netanyahu had been in that position? That would have been the end of Oslo, right? But Rabin said, no, we have partners to peace. We continue to work with them. We try to target the terrorists, but we don't move away from the peace process. Now, look at how Netanyahu dealt with the recent, one-off events, right, of this Palestinian who murdered a fellow co-worker a couple weeks ago, right? Netanyahu says the exact opposite of Rabin. He says, we continue to target terrorists and we build settlements, right? So in a sense, I'm thinking of, who gets to frame the narratives and how important media certainly is, how important leadership certainly is, how these narratives are actually very malleable, but we don't have, in a sense, the movers to move the Israeli perspective to where it needs to be, and eventually the Palestinian perspective as well.
I totally agree on the lack of adequate leadership with the vision on that narrative. Netanyahu has his own vision and is pushing for that quite skillfully. In terms of the media, first of all, the narratives. Yes, there are. You can adjust the narratives, but you have to understand something about Israel. Israel is a very small country. It's size of population such as New Jersey. The media is very limited. You have 3 news channels, 4 big newspapers, and most of the journalists are working in all of them. So the diversity in terms of ideas is quite limited. And it's quite easy to follow a particular kind of tone, especially if it's aggressive, which is what's going on right now in the Israeli sphere. There is a very aggressive, now a bit less, but in the last 1.5 years, there was even a bit more. There was an enormous attack on those who attempt to express different, more liberal interpretation of the situation, or suggest liberal solutions. Yeah, so that was, did I answer, covered? Okay, thanks. Yes?
Sorry I came so late, I just saw the tail end of it. There's something I'm trying to understand through press, gleaning things from the press. I don't have it very clear. There's a very hot piece of geography, the Temple Mount. It's about 6 acres. You know more about it than I do, of course. And I'm very interested if you could tell me something about what is the feeling in the Knesset and what's the feeling in the general public about this little piece of geography, because I recall when Mr. Sharon visited this place, this is supposedly the cause of the Infitah. Now, my question is, I'll narrow it a little more. Do you think the general public is kind of supporting just leave that place alone, or is the general public thinking we got to build a temple in that same spot, even though these other guys didn't claim to it? Okay. How does the general public feel about that? How does the Knesset feel about that?
Okay, so in terms of building the temple, most of the Israeli population will think this is absurd. Some might entertain it, but they know that it's not possible. But there are there is a small group that really think that it will happen. That group has relatively big representation in the Knesset. Why? Because of very astute political maneuvers and activity. Nonetheless, I really don't see it happening unless it would be Israel will change completely. Would change completely. In terms of living it or keeping it, it's I think it's open to negotiation. It depends on the atmosphere. If, for example, Netanyahu will bring a peace treaty that will leave it outside, most of the people will say that's fine, because they believe that if Netanyahu say it's right, it's fine. There is a lot of belief in the leadership, because in Israel you've been in the army, many been in the army, and you know that the person in charge knows more than you, and he has access to intelligence, access to whatever, and he can make the better decision. Here in the United States, it's not necessarily the case, because you keep challenging. You want them to show you what they know, because you're not sure that they know everything and they will decide right. Israel, it's not the case. So it's the lack of leadership is very detrimental. Yes.
There is a school of thought which propounds that peace talks on one hand and the expansion of Jewish settlements on the other hand are nothing but the double standards on the part of Israel. Being an analyst, how do you perceive that? I would like to have your insight on it. Don't you think so that this kind of demeanor as a biggest stumbling block in the peace talks?
Yes, for sure. The question is what they do discuss in the peace talks. Because in theory, you can say, yes, this is destabilizing because our assumption is that we will keep the settlements. But if we won't keep the settlements, so we're just building the Palestinian state, right? We're building roads, we're building railroads, we're building towns. So that's a political maneuver that can go around it. I'm not sure that they will go for it or they will do it, but it's an option that they can play with. But in general, yes, the settlement project is destabilizing element. It damages the trust. It offends, and it is some sort of aggression.
I was going to ask you about the settlements. What possible narrative can someone put out that's anything other than this is an absolute insult and flies in the face of any genuine attempt to make peace? Like, what would it sound like? We're building these settlements because
I'm building those settlements because I have a problematic coalition, and in order to maintain it, I will. But it doesn't really matter because you will get those settlements. It doesn't really matter. Oh, you, the Palestinian. I was Netanyahu.
So the Palestinians are going to get the Jewish settlements?
This is one story. This is one strategy. This is one narrative. You ask me how I will market it. I marketed it for you. Did you buy it? Okay. Okay. Yes.
It sounds pretty pessimistic.
Oh yeah.
So they say that if you want something done, give me 50 adults or one youth. Okay. So do you have a sense of the youth in that part of the country on either side of the equation that say enough's enough? Let's get on with it.
Well, my generation is really fed up with what's going on, and many leaving. Many stay, but they adhere to the particular type of interpretation of reality and narratives. There was an enormous cry out in Israel a couple of, it was in 2011, right? That dealt with the economic crisis in Israel, but it was connected to the investment of money and resources in the settlement state. It is a debate. It is something that the youth talk about, but they feel that they cannot change it because of the political structure, because of many things. The elections, recent election, when they picked the sectarian party for the middle class, they hope that things will change. So far, it's quite a disappointment for them. But this is what I have to give. Yes.
Just a comment on what you were just speaking about. I feel like there's, like the Israeli youth, like there's a lack of, there's a lack of understanding, of like the Palestinian youth. I feel like they need to understand that they are the ones who can change the future of Israel or the political situation, and whether that's not stated, or expressed because of the government, but it's an idea that needs to be, flown through the, minds of the Israeli youth, because, in my opinion, the only way to really make a shift in the Israeli political system is going to be to change the mindset of the future leaders. So And I feel like right now, the way Israeli policies have it, it really intentionally kind of limits and intentionally isolates the Israeli youth from the Palestinian youth. You know, I'm sure you know, of course you're all aware, you know, Israelis are, it's considered illegal to even enter a Palestinian village automatically. This one huge policy that just drives me crazy.
So yes, I agree.
You mentioned about like the border of Israel that it's not recognized by the international. You mean the outside border or the inside border, including the wall? And what's the future of the wall between the three, the three solution, no solution, or two state or one state?
Okay, one thing at a time. International borders, the borders within, which is the outside. It depends what would be the result, and actually the borders with Syria as well are not nationally recognized. In terms of the separation wall was erected during the Second Intifada. The government did not want to do it because they were afraid that it would be the future borders, and they don't wanted it because they wanted more. They don't wanted something on the ground. But the security services advocated for that, pushed for that, and eventually they made it, and it assisted with reducing violence, terror. So now it's there. The line, the line it goes, it spreads, was shifting and still shifting because of legal appeals by NGOs and by Palestinian and by Israelis, trying to include more or less in it. What does it mean in the Israeli context? Not much, because in their opinion they can still have the wall and they can still have the land, or if there would be a solution, they will move the wall wherever they need to. It's not such a big thing on that sense, unless you live next to the wall, and then.
Just a small one of what you were just saying. Has there been a study that actually showed there was the effect of the wall reducing violence?
Oh yes, many. Yeah. Because it's harder to pass. But that's simple. In order to pass, you have to do an extra effort. The extra effort means that it's easier to catch you. That's it.
One reason why I'm asking is because in regards to, like, for example, the suicide bombing, I mean, the situation, the contingency has been happening since 1948. But the first suicide bombing didn't even happen until 1993. So I just feel like, some people, they tend to correlate, like, there's always been a history of suicide bombings, but the first one was not until 1993. So.
Yeah. Yep.
Thanking our guest today.
Thank you.